the golden sunset reflected in the waters of Lake Geneva as James Turner's car turned onto the gravel driveway leading to the secluded cottage. Emily gazed in admiration at the view. The wooden house surrounded by pine trees seemed like the perfect place for a honeymoon. "Here we are." James turned off the engine and turned to Emily with a smile. "What do you think, honey?" Emily opened the door and stepped out of the car, breathing deeply of the fresh Wisconsin air. Her blonde hair fluttered in the light breeze and her eyes sparkled with anticipation. "This is amazing, James. Much better than the pictures," she replied, pulling a camera out of her bag. "We should definitely capture this moment." James watched her fondly, but a careful observer would have noticed a shadow of tension flashed across his face as Emily concentrated fully on taking the picture, ignoring his presence. "Let's get your stuff in first, and then you can take pictures," he said, pulling the suitcases out of the trunk. Emily nodded, but took a few more pictures before following her husband into the house. The cottage was more spacious than it looked from the outside. The living room with the fireplace flowed into the bright kitchen, and the panoramic windows overlooked the lake. Emily immediately opened the glass door and stepped out onto the terrace. "We must rent a boat tomorrow," she exclaimed, "and I want to go to that farmer's market I read about." James came up behind her and put his arm around her waist. "Of course you do, sweetie. Anything you want," he whispered in her ear. "But tonight I'd like us to stay here. Just you and me." Emily turned to him with a smile and kissed him. "Sounds perfect," she agreed. The first 2 days of their honeymoon passed idyllically. They woke up at first light, ate breakfast on the terrace, took walks along the lake, and spent evenings by the fireplace with a glass of wine. From the outside, they looked like a perfect couple, a young talented surgeon and his beautiful wife, an aspiring photographer. But on the third day, something changed. Over breakfast, Emily announced her plans. "I've made an appointment with a local publisher of travel guides," she said, spreading jam on her toast. "They're interested in my work and have offered to do a series of images for a new issue on Lake Geneva." James froze with a cup of coffee in his hand. "You didn't say you were planning on working during our honeymoon." Irritation slipped into his voice. "It's not really a job, more of an opportunity," Emily shrugged. "Besides, it's only a couple hours. You can read that book you brought with you in the meantime." "I thought we were going to spend the day together on the boat." "We can do that tomorrow." Emily stood up from the table and kissed her husband on the cheek. "I'll be back for lunch, I promise." When she left, James sat motionless for a long time, clutching the cup so tightly that his knuckles turned white. Emily returned after 4 in the afternoon, radiant with joy. "They have offered me a permanent partnership," she exclaimed, barely crossing the threshold. "I could come here once a month for a shoot. Wouldn't that be wonderful?" James, sitting in a chair with a book, didn't share her enthusiasm. "You're 3 hours late, Emily." "Sorry, we got to talking and then I met some other photographers and the time just flew by." She walked over to him and sat down next to him. "Don't be mad, please. I'm so excited about this opportunity. You should have called." "I tried, but the connection here is terrible. Look, I only have one signal bar." She showed her phone. James sighed and tried to smile. "Okay, I'm happy for you, but let's not be apart again, okay? This is our honeymoon after all." "Of course," Emily agreed, but there was an expression in her eyes that James couldn't decipher. They spent the next 2 days together as they had originally planned, but Emily was often distracted on her phone, answering messages from her new acquaintances. James was becoming increasingly tense, though he tried not to show it. On their 5th day in Lake Geneva, they had a fight. It had started with Emily's innocuous remark about wanting to visit an art gallery in town tomorrow. "Going out again?" James asked, putting the dishes in the dishwasher. "I thought we could go together," Emily replied, surprised at his tone. "You know very well that I'm not interested in art." "But you could try for my sake," Emily began to lose patience. "I mean, I go with you to the restaurants you choose, even though I prefer a different cuisine. It's not the same." "Why not? Because your preferences are more important than mine?" James turned sharply toward her. "Because I planned this vacation for the two of us, and you keep finding ways to spend time without me." "That's not fair, James. I just want some independence. It doesn't mean I don't want to spend time with you." "Independence? You're my wife, Emily. We're supposed to be one." Emily took a step back, startled by the intensity of his words. Being a wife doesn't mean dissolving into you, James. I'm still a separate person with my own interests and desires. The argument continued for another half hour, becoming increasingly tense. At one point, James grabbed the vase and threw it against the wall with force. "I need some air," he finally said and walked out of the house, slamming the door loudly. He wandered around the lakeshore for almost 2 hours, trying to calm himself down. When he returned, the cottage was quiet and dark. "Emily?" he called out, turning on the light in the living room. No one answered. He checked the bedroom, the bathroom, the terrace. Emily was nowhere to be found. Her camera remained on the table, but her bag and phone were nowhere to be seen. James began to panic. He called her again and again, but Emily's phone was out of range. He searched the entire house and surrounding area, yelling her name, but to no avail. At 10 o'clock that evening, after 3 hours of searching on his own, James called the police. Detective Rebecca Moore arrived on the scene 40 minutes after the call. A tall woman with short dark hair and an attentive gaze, she immediately took control of the situation. "Mr. Turner, tell us exactly what happened," she asked, pulling out a notepad. James repeated his version of events. They had an argument, he went out for a walk, and when he returned, Emily was gone. "And what did you two argue about?" the detective asked. "About nothing," James replied, avoiding her gaze. "About plans for tomorrow." Detective Moore walked around the cottage, scrutinizing each room. In the bedroom, she noticed scattered belongings and an open dresser drawer. "Looks like she packed in a hurry," she observed. "Or she was forced to pack," James suggested gloomily. The detective walked over to the wall where the marks of the broken vase were visible. "Did this happen during your argument?" James nodded, clearly embarrassed. "I lost control for a moment. That's never happened before." Rebecca Moore said nothing, but made a note in her notebook. In the bathroom, she found drops of water on the floor and a damp towel. "Did your wife have time to shower after you left?" "I don't know, maybe," James replied, following her lead. "What do you think? Did she just leave or—" "It's too early to draw conclusions, Mr. Turner," the detective interrupted him. "Is there anyone she might have gone to? Friends, relatives nearby?" "No, we don't know anyone around here, although she's met some photographers and a publisher. But I don't have their contacts." Detective Moore noticed a thin scratch on the wooden floor of the hallway leading to the front door that looked fresh. "Did your wife have a large suitcase?" "Yes, quite heavy," James replied, and immediately turned pale as he realized what the detective was getting at. "Mr. Turner, I'd like to see your car." They stepped outside. James opened the trunk of his SUV. The detective examined it carefully with a flashlight. "When was the last time you opened the trunk?" "When we got here, 5 days ago. We took everything inside and never used the car again." The detective ran her finger along the edge of the trunk and showed James the dust marks. "Someone opened it recently," she said. Back in the house, they continued their inspection. In the living room, behind the couch, the detective found an earring that James identified as belonging to Emily. "Strange why it's here," he muttered. "Emily is very careful with her jewelry." When the detective asked him about Emily's past, her friends and habits, James answered willingly. But when it came to his own past, he became visibly nervous. "You said you've been married for 3 months. How long did you two date before you got married?" Rebecca asked. "About a year," replied James, averting his gaze. "And where did you two meet?" "At the hospital where I work. Emily was doing a report on the new cardiac surgery department." "And before you met Emily, were you in a serious relationship?" James tensed, his fingers beginning to tap nervously on the arm of the chair. "There were a few relationships, nothing major." "Have you ever been engaged or married?" "No," the answer came too quickly. Detective Moore made another notation in her notebook. "Mr. Turner, do you have a picture of your wife? We need to circulate an APB." James pulled out his phone and showed their wedding photo. Emily was radiant in a white dress, her eyes glowing with happiness. "Beautiful woman," the detective remarked. "Send me that photo. Also, I need all the contacts of the people she's been in contact with here." "I told you I don't know their names," James replied irritably. "Check her emails, social media. There might be information there." Detective Moore checked the doors and windows but found no signs of forced entry. She looked outside, shining a flashlight down the path leading from the house to the lake. "We'll organize a search operation at first light," she said as she walked back into the house. "In the meantime, I'll ask you not to leave the cottage, and if your wife contacts you, let me know immediately." As the detective was about to leave, James suddenly asked, "Do you think something has happened to her? Or she just walked out on me?" Rebecca Moore looked at him carefully. "We have too little information to draw conclusions yet, Mr. Turner, but we will find your wife, I promise." Left alone, James stood at the window for a long time, looking out over the dark lake. His face was impenetrable, but his hands trembled slightly as he pulled from his pocket a small locket with Emily's picture inside. Detective Rebecca Moore didn't trust coincidences. In 15 years on the force, she'd learned to see patterns where others saw coincidences. And now, looking at Emily Turner's photograph, she sensed that something sinister lurked behind the beautiful facade of this story. In the morning, immediately after her briefing with the search team, she'd gone to the station and immersed herself in researching James Turner's past. At first glance, everything looked flawless. Prestigious medical school, residency at a renowned clinic, a brilliant career as a surgeon, lots of thanks from patients and recommendations from colleagues. However, when she tried to verify information about his life before entering the university, she encountered the first inconsistencies. Information was sparse and some documents contained conflicting information. "Strange," Rebecca muttered as she looked through the files. "It's like someone was deliberately trying to muddle the trail." She sent a query to the other state's systems and busied herself with browsing Emily's social media. Unlike her husband, the girl led an active online life, regularly posting photos, chatting with friends, sharing her thoughts. The last posts were made a few days before her disappearance and contained rave reviews of Lake Geneva and photos of the lake. The detective's phone rang, interrupting her musings. "Detective Moore," she answered. "This is Steve from the tech department. I have some interesting news on your inquiry about James Turner." "Speaking." "I found references to a man with similar credentials but a different name in Minnesota about 7 years ago. James Harris, also a doctor, same date of birth. He abruptly quit his job at a clinic in St. Paul and disappeared. About 6 months later, James Turner shows up in Chicago." Rebecca quickly jotted down the information. "Got a picture of Harris?" "Sent it to you in the mail. The quality isn't great, but I think it's the same person." Opening the email, the detective saw a group shot of the medical staff. The man standing in the second row did indeed look like James Turner, although he looked younger and wore glasses. "Thanks, Steve. Check more St. Paul's for that period. Any disappearances of young women or unsolved murders there." After the call, Rebecca decided to return to the cottage for a more thorough inspection. James wasn't there. He'd gone to the local hospital to take tests at the request of the police. The detective methodically searched each room. In the bedroom, checking the space under the bed, she noticed that one of the floorboards was protruding slightly above the floor. Carefully prying it up, Rebecca found a small space containing a leather diary and a flash drive. Opening the diary, she saw Emily's neat handwriting. The last entry was dated the day she disappeared. "I can't believe what I discovered today." The box was hidden in the far corner of the trunk under the spare tire. Inside is a strange collection: a hair clip, a gold ring engraved "Forever Yours, L", a lipstick, a silk scarf. All these things are like trophies. Whose are they, and why does James keep them? "I took pictures. We need to get to the bottom of this." Detective Moore plugged the flash drive into her laptop. There were dozens of photos on it: landscapes of Lake Geneva, architecture, people on the streets. And in the most recent folder, snapshots of a strange collection of objects spread out on a bed. The very things Emily had written about in the diary. Flipping through the diary further, Rebecca found a few more disturbing entries. "James becomes a different person when I show independence. It started before we were married, but I wrote it off as stress and fatigue. Now his control is becoming suffocating. Yesterday he tracked my phone to see where I was, even though I told him I was going to the store. He smiled while saying it like it was a joke, but his eyes remained cold." The detective closed the diary and reflected. The situation was becoming increasingly disturbing. Back at the station, she found that the results of her inquiries had begun to come in. James Harris did exist, and before him there was another, James Parker, a medical student in Boston. Each time the story was similar: a sudden disappearance and reappearance in a new city with slightly altered credentials. There was a knock on her office door. "Come in," Rebecca said without taking her eyes off the monitor. A young woman with short dark hair and a wary look entered the office. "Detective Moore, my name is Carla Donovan. I've seen the news about Emily Turner's disappearance and I think I can help." Rebecca motioned for her to sit down and looked at her visitor carefully. "How can you help, Miss Donovan?" Carla clutched her bag nervously in her lap. "I know James Turner. Or rather, when I knew him, he called himself James Harris. We dated for about a year in St. Paul." That got the detective's attention. "And what happened?" "At first everything was perfect. He was attentive, caring, charming, but gradually I noticed that he was trying to control my every move, who I socialized with, how I dressed, where I went. If I did something he didn't like, he changed, became cold, distant, and then he'd make jealous scenes." "Did he ever physically abuse you?" Rebecca asked. Carla shook her head. "No, but there were times when I was afraid of him. He could go hours without talking to me, and then he'd suddenly show up with gifts and apologies. It was like a swing, up and down." "How did your relationship end?" "I started noticing oddities. One day I found a box of women's accessories in his closet. Earrings, scarves, makeup. When I asked him about it, he said it was a memory of his mother. But then, I happened to see a picture of his family, and the jewelry didn't match his mother's style." Rebecca wrote down every word. "What happened next?" "I became afraid of him and decided to leave. I packed my things when he wasn't home and left to stay with my sister in another town. He looked for me, even came to visit my parents. A month later, he just disappeared. I found out he quit the clinic without notice. I haven't seen him since, until I saw his picture on the news today." After talking to Carla, Detective Moore was even more convinced that Emily's disappearance was directly related to James. She decided to talk to the staff at the cottage where the couple was staying. The maid, an older woman named Martha, was reluctant to make contact at first, but gradually got to talking. "They seemed like such a happy couple," she said, wiping down the front desk. "But there was something about him. I don't know how to explain it. The look, maybe. Too attentive, too controlling." "Did you notice anything unusual in their behavior?" Martha hesitated. "The day she disappeared, I saw him loading something into the trunk of his car. A rather large package or bag. It was about 6 p.m. I was finishing cleaning the cottage next door." "Are you sure it was that day?" "Absolutely. I remembered because he looked worried, looking around all the time. I also thought he was preparing a surprise for his wife." This information contradicted the testimony of James, who claimed he had not used the car since arriving. The next step was to speak with James's closest friend, Alex Foster. Detective Moore met him at a coffee shop near the hospital where they both worked. Alex turned out to be a pleasant man with an open face and a friendly smile. He was genuinely worried about his friend. "James is one of the best people I know," he said, stirring his coffee. "I can't believe something happened to Emily. He loves her so much." "How long have you known James?" Rebecca asked. "About 5 years. We met when he came to work at our hospital." "Does he ever talk about his life in Minnesota? Or in Boston?" Alex frowned slightly. "No, he doesn't like to talk about the past. All I know is that he had a difficult childhood." "Did he mention his previous relationships?" "Only in general terms. There was some unpleasant breakup in the past that took him a long time to recover from. He said that woman betrayed him, but he didn't give details." The detective noticed Alex tapping his fingers nervously on the desk. "Mr. Foster, there's something you're not telling me. This is a man's life we're talking about. If you know something, now is the time to tell me." Alex sighed and lowered his eyes. "One day when we were really drunk, James told a strange story about how his ex found some of his personal belongings and threatened to reveal his secret. He was really drunk and talking confused. I didn't understand what secret we were talking about. But he said a phrase that scared me at the time. Sometimes you just have to erase the past and start over." "And you never asked him about it later?" "No. He didn't remember that conversation the next day, and I didn't want to pry into his personal life." After her meeting with Alex, The detective returned to the station and checked the new messages. The text had sent the results of the analysis of Emily's laptop that had been found in the cottage. In addition to photos of the strange collection of items, it revealed search queries made the day before the disappearance, how to check a person's real name, personality change after marriage, controlling behavior in relationships. Rebecca looked through the photos Emily had taken in the last few days. The pictures were beautiful: a golden sunset over the lake, a misty morning in the woods, the old buildings of the town. But there were some strange ones. A close-up of a cottage doorknob with barely visible scratches, a picture of a bedroom window with the reflection of someone's shadow, a shot of a lakeside with a lonely pier where a heart with initials was carved on a wooden board. Studying these photos carefully, the detective noticed a pattern. In each of these strange pictures, a small red object was visible in the corner of the frame: a hair clip, a ribbon, a keychain. It was as if Emily was deliberately marking important places. She was leaving clues, Rebecca muttered. Knew something might happen and was trying to leave a trail. The detective turned back to the photo of the dock. Zooming in on the photo, she discerned the initials carved inside the heart, JT+K.M, quote, and the date, 3 years old. She immediately called Carla Donovan. "Miss Donovan, have you ever been to Lake Geneva with James?" "No, we never went there together," Carla replied, surprised by the question. "Does your maiden name start with the letter M by any chance?" "No, I've always been Donovan. What happened?" The detective thanked her and ended the call. So there was another woman, KM, with whom James had been at this lake 3 years ago, and perhaps her fate could shed some light on Emily's disappearance. Rebecca went back to her computer and started checking disappearances and unsolved cases of women with the initials KM in the Lake Geneva area over the last 3 or 4 years. A half hour later, she found what she was looking for. Christine Miller, 27 years old, had disappeared while vacationing in Lake Geneva 3 years ago. Her body had never been found. Reviewing the case file, the detective discovered that Christine had been vacationing alone. There were no signs of a struggle at her cottage, and all personal belongings were still in place. Local police speculated that she may have drowned during a night swim, but the body never surfaced. Was James connected to Christine's disappearance? And if so, did Emily suffer the same fate? Detective Moore decided to do another thorough search of the cottage and grounds. Perhaps Emily had left some more clues that would help uncover the truth. While re-examining the cottage, Rebecca noticed one of Emily's photographs that showed the backyard of the house with a small red object standing out against the grass. Walking outside, the detective made her way to that spot and began to scrutinize the ground among the grass. She noticed a small red scarf, partially buried in the ground. Carefully retrieving it, Rebecca found that the scarf covered a flash drive wrapped in a waterproof bag. It had been a clever precaution by Emily to hide important evidence from James. Back at the station, the detective plugged the flash drive into her computer. It revealed not only pictures of the strange collection of items, but also a hidden folder of documents. Among them were copies of old newspaper articles about the disappearance of a young woman in St. Paul 6 years ago and a note about Christine Miller. Emily had done her own investigation and might have gotten too close to the truth. Also on the flash drive was a photograph taken surreptitiously through the ajar bedroom door. It showed James sitting on the edge of the bed, holding a brass bracelet, his face contorted with a strange mixture of nostalgia and anger. Everything indicated that James Turner was not who he claimed to be, and Emily had probably paid a high price for his discovery. Detective Rebecca Moore obtained a search warrant for James and Emily Turner's townhouse early that morning. Gathering a team of 4 officers, she arrived at the location, an elegant 2-story mansion in suburban Chicago. "We'll start with the garage and basement, then methodically check every room," she instructed the team, looking for any evidence related to Emily's disappearance or past victims. The house was spotlessly clean and organized, everything in its place, not a speck of dust. In James's office, they found paperwork for the purchase of a cottage in Lake Geneva, made 2 months before the honeymoon, much earlier than he'd told Emily. In the bedroom, one of the officers noticed an oddity in the dressing room wall. "Detective, take a look at this," he called out to Rebecca. "The dimensions of the room don't match the house plan. There should be extra space here." A close inspection of the wall revealed a hidden door, skillfully disguised as part of the wood paneling. Rebecca cautiously opened it and revealed a small, windowless room. Inside stood glass display cases, like a museum, containing dozens of items, neatly signed and dated. "Oh my God," she whispered as she examined the collection. The display cases held women's items: earrings, scarves, lipsticks, bracelets, hairpins, photographs. Each item was accompanied by a card with a name and date. The oldest item was dated 8 years ago. Rebecca recognized the bracelet she'd seen in Emily's photograph. Christine Miller, Lake Geneva, August 20th. Nearby lay a silk scarf signed Laura Adams, Boston, March 3rd, a ring engraved Forever Yours, L. In the far corner of the room stood a locked safe. With the help of a specialist, they managed to open it. Inside, they found personal papers in various names, all with James's picture and a stack of diaries. Rebecca opened the topmost one and began to read. "Laura doesn't realize that we are meant to be together. She thinks she can just walk away like nothing happened between us. I have to show her how wrong she is." The entries grew more disturbing with each page, revealing James's obsession with his partners and deep rage when they didn't live up to his expectations. "We have everything we need for an arrest warrant," Rebecca said, closing the journal. "Find me James Turner at once." But James had disappeared from the cottage in Lake Geneva. The local police reported his car missing from the parking lot last night. Back at the station, Rebecca discovered that the tech department had been able to recover data from Emily's cell phone found outside the cottage. Among the deleted messages were strange sequences of numbers sent to an unknown number. "It could be a code," the tech suggested. "It looks like a system where each digit corresponds to a letter or word." Rebecca remembered that Emily's journal had mentioned a game she and her friend had played in college, encrypting messages using numbers that corresponded to pages and words in their favorite book. "Check the book list on her laptop," Rebecca instructed. An hour later, they had deciphered the messages. Emily had indeed used a code based on her favorite book, Jane Eyre. The last message, sent the day she disappeared, read, "He knows what I found, an old hunting lodge off the North Shore. Coordinates?" That was the end of the message. Rebecca immediately summoned Carla Donovan for further questioning. "Did James ever mention a hunting cabin or a place he liked to retreat to?" the detective asked when Carla showed up at the station. "He talked about some family lake house where he spent summer vacations as a child," Carla replied. "But never invited me there. Said it was his private retreat. Tell me more about his behavior. How did his control manifest itself?" Carla took a deep breath. "At first, it was little things. He picked out what I'd wear for dinner, advised me on who I should be friends with, said he just cared about me. Then he started checking my phone, demanding to know where I was every minute. If I was late for a meeting with him, he'd make a scene and then become incredibly caring, as if nothing had happened." "Were there threats?" "Not directly, but once when I said I wanted to break up, he smashed a mirror with his fist and said, 'You will never belong to another man.' There was something in his eyes, inhuman. I was scared, and then I decided to run away secretly." Carla held out a photograph to the detective. "I found this when I was packing. A picture of the lake house. Maybe this will help?" The photo showed a small wooden house surrounded by tall pine trees. In the background, you could see the lake and a distinctive rock protruding above the water. Rebecca showed the photo to a local geography expert, and he was able to identify the approximate area, the northern shore of Lake Geneva, a hard-to-reach area rarely visited by tourists. The search team moved in immediately. Rebecca personally led the operation. They left the cars on the forest road and walked the last 2 kilometers through the dense forest. When they approached the intended location, Rebecca ordered the group to spread out and move as quietly as possible. The roof of a wooden structure was already visible through the trees. The hunting lodge looked abandoned, the logs darkened by time, the path overgrown. But looking closer, the detective noticed fresh tire tracks on the driveway and a light smoke rising from the chimney. They surrounded the house. Rebecca, gun at the ready, went to the front door and listened. Muffled voices came from inside. At her signal, the group burst into the house. James Turner sat at a rough wooden desk, an open laptop in front of him. He didn't even try to resist as the officers handcuffed him. "Where's Emily?" Rebecca asked demandingly, looking around the cabin's only room. James looked at her silently with a cold smile. "Search the whole place," ordered the detective. "Check the cellar, the attic, the outbuildings." One of the officers discovered a trapdoor in the floor, hidden under a threadbare carpet. Down below was a small cellar. Descending the steep stairs, Rebecca saw a mattress on the floor, an empty plate, and a bottle of water. On the wall were day markers scratched with something sharp. "She was here," Rebecca stated. "But she's not here now." In a corner of the basement, they found a woman's hair clip, just like the one in Emily's photos, and a piece of paper with numbers scribbled on it, another coded message. Back upstairs, Rebecca walked over to James. "Where is Emily Turner now?" James looked up at her. "My wife decided to leave me, so have they all. But no one can just walk away from me. No one. You kept her here against her will." It wasn't a question, but a statement. "I was giving her a chance to realize how wrong she was. Time to think about her behavior." "And what happened to Christine Miller? And with Laura Adams? Did they get a chance, too?" James's face trembled. "You don't understand anything. They were perfect in the beginning, all of them. And then they showed their true natures. Ungrateful, rebellious." "Where's Emily?" Rebecca repeated. "I don't know," James replied, and for the first time, concern flashed in his eyes. "She was here last night. I came down this morning and the basement was empty. I was just looking for signs of her when you showed up." Rebecca didn't believe him, but a cursory inspection confirmed it. Someone had recently left the basement. The soft ground around the cabin revealed a woman's footprints leading into the woods. "Split into groups and comb the area," she ordered, handing James over to two officers for transportation to the station. As James was being led away to the car, a man stepped into the clearing in front of the cabin. It was Alex Foster, pale and with a bandage on his head. "Detective Moore!" he called out to Rebecca. "I've found her! Emily's alive!" James jerked in the officer's arms and shouted, You betrayed me, Alex! You're just like the rest of them!" Alex ignored his screams, turning to the detective. "She's safe, in my car. I took her to the hospital, but she insisted I bring her here when she heard about the police operation." Rebecca followed Alex to the road where Emily was sitting in his car, pale, bruised face, but alive. "Miss Turner, you're safe now," Rebecca said, sitting down next to her. "I know," Emily replied quietly. "Alex saved me." Later at the hospital, Emily told her story. She had discovered the strange collection in the trunk of James's car and had taken pictures. When she started looking for information about her husband's past, she found articles about missing women. "After our fight, I wanted to leave, but he came back sooner than I expected," Emily recounted. "When I told him I was leaving him and I knew about his past, he changed. His face became alien. He hit me, and when I woke up, I was already in that basement." "How did you manage to escape?" Rebecca asked. "Alex found me. He was watching James too, suspecting something amiss. He came to the cabin last night when James was away for a while. We tried to run away, but James came back and attacked Alex. There was a struggle. Alex got hit in the head but was able to stun James. We hid in the woods and got to Alex's car in the morning." Alex, who was sitting next to him, added, "I've been noticing odd behavior from James for a long time. When Emily disappeared and he started acting suspicious, I decided to follow him. He didn't know I had discovered that cabin a few months ago when we were fishing nearby." A full investigation revealed a horrifying picture. In James's secret room, they found evidence linking him to the disappearance of 5 women over the past 8 years. Each time, the story was similar. He would charm them, marry them, or be close to doing so. And then when they started to show independence, they would disappear, and James would start a new life in another city. Christine Miller's body was found buried in the woods near the hunting cabin, but Laura Adams and 2 other women were never found. The critical piece of evidence that finally confirmed James's guilt came in an unexpected place. In the basement of his Chicago home, under the floorboards, personal papers of the missing women and records of the places where he had held them were discovered. His diaries revealed a pathological psychology. James was looking for the perfect partner who would completely submit to his will. He created an image of the perfect relationship in his imagination and became enraged when reality did not match his fantasies. When questioned, A psychiatrist diagnosed James as having narcissistic personality disorder with paranoid elements. He created idealized images of his partners, and when they didn't live up to his expectations, his self-esteem collapsed, causing deep rage. He didn't see them as individuals, the psychiatrist explained. To him, they were an extension of himself, his property. When they showed independence, in his eyes it was a betrayal deserving of punishment. A month later, Rebecca Moore sat in her office writing the final report on the James Turner case. He was charged with murder, kidnapping, and a host of other crimes. Emily was slowly recovering and had agreed to testify against him in court. The phone rang. It was Emily. "Detective Moore, I just wanted to thank you again. If it wasn't for you, I wouldn't be sitting here right now." "You saved yourself, Emily," Rebecca replied. "Your attentiveness, your cleverness in gathering evidence. We just followed the trail you left behind." "You know what the scariest part is?" Emily said quietly. "I really loved him. Part of me still remembers the James I met a year ago, attentive, caring, charming." "It was a mask," Rebecca reminded her gently. "He wore it for years, perfecting his art of manipulation." "I know, but sometimes I think he believed in that mask himself, that somewhere deep down inside, he wanted to be the man he showed the world." Rebecca pondered her words. Perhaps, but the choice was always his, and time after time he chose control and violence over love. After the conversation, the detective took a long look at the pictures from James's secret room, the faces of young women smiling at the camera, unaware of their fate. Emily had been lucky. She'd been able to break the cycle and survive. For others, it was too late. She closed the case file and set it on the shelf. Another case solved, another criminal caught. But the questions remained. What turns a man into a monster? Where is the line between love and obsession? And how do you recognize the darkness behind the perfect facade?